You're listening to the Entrepreneur to Author podcast.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur to Author podcast, the podcast that brings you practical strategies for building authority and growing your business. And now, here's your host, Scott McMillan.
My guest today is Kaylin Hunterus. Kaylin is an internationally renowned virtual speaker, web designer, copywriter, and sales strategist. And he specializes in helping entrepreneurs create systems that sell their offers automatically. He's also the author of Marketing Yourself, How to Elevate Your Personal Platform to the Next Level. Kaylin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Scott. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. Well, to start with, I'd love if you could share a little bit about yourself and your entrepreneurial journey for our audience so they can get a bit of a sense of where you're coming from.
Sure. I've had an unorthodox journey. I started my career as an acrobat in the circus. And I was a street performer for a long time. Earning and maintaining the attention of an audience was how I learned my craft. And now, as a marketer, I use those skills to earn and maintain the attention of a demographic. So they're very related in a number of ways. But what I like so much about marketing is it's the art of earning and directing attention. And so I started as a WordPress web designer, and I've been a digital nomad for 10 years, traveling around the world with my young family and making websites for experts and entrepreneurs. And then I transitioned from websites more into marketing strategy, helping people figure out what's my message going to be and how do I convert this attention into revenue. And I've been doing that for a number of years, and it's been a lot of fun.
I love that non-traditional background. It's so often that it's those non-traditional, different experiences that really give us a different perspective on things that other people maybe look at in a very traditional way. So thank you so much for that. And you've written Marketing Yourself. Could you share a bit about the book itself and who it's written for and what your goal is for that reader?
Sure. Yeah. Marketing Yourself is a book about elevating your personal platform. A lot of the clients that I specialized in working with in my web design agency, Scott, were authors, coaches, and speakers, people who had something to say and something to sell. And I found that these types of entrepreneurs, they generally went through 4 different phases of their business. And the first phase was the soapbox. And anybody who has something to say can get up on a soapbox. But it's not until they have something to sell that it becomes a commercial enterprise. And that level of a platform is, I call the showroom, where your communication is focused on the things that you have on offer and how people can buy from you. And showrooms are great because you can build a business that can sustain a lifestyle in a showroom. But it's not, the problem with a showroom is that it's got a ceiling. And so people often want to expand to the stage where they can go around and talk to other audiences and the systems do the selling for them. And helping people make this transition from the soapbox to the showroom to the stage, that's why I wrote this book, is to give people the practical tools that they need to elevate their platform, clarify their message, and attract attention from the right types of clients.
Fantastic. So soapbox, showroom, and stage. That's a really cool metaphor for those different phases. I love that a lot. How did you find the writing process? I know you're a bit of a content producer. How did you find the process of taking that intellectual property out of your head and getting it onto the page?
Well, I've been writing for a long time. I started blogging back in 2003, so I've been in the content production game for quite a while. When I was in college, I actually spent a lot of time publishing magazine articles, and so I really got into that article form writing, and that's been the mainstay of my creativity for a long time. But I'd never published a book before Marketing Yourself, so getting into the long form process was really a transition. But I used my short form experience to create that volume of content. And so what I did, Scott, is I wrote a big, long, bad first draft. That was my first step, is just to get a whole bunch of words down on paper. And then I went through the revision process and did rewriting. And what I did was I published my book as chapters through my newsletter first. And so every week I would send out a newsletter, because that's what you do if you're going to maintain a relationship with an audience, is you send something every week to stay top of mind, and providing new and interesting content is a great way to do it. And so I knew after this bad first draft that I kind of knew what this was going to be about, but I didn't have it in the right order. Some of the topics didn't belong. And so while I was in that crafting process, deciding what goes in and what goes out, I did two things. The first is I made a Trello board that had a list of the different topics that I wanted to talk about. And then the second thing is, for every one of those topics, I had a Trello card that I built a lot of assets for. And the first asset for each one was sending a newsletter on the topic. And so I'd write a big, long newsletter on this one topic that eventually morphed into a chapter in the book. And so every week I'd send out a big, long newsletter that had this idea that I wanted to work on in my book. And it was still raw, but I got like this refined version of it. And so I got a newsletter out of it, which turned into a blog post, which got some social media content. And then after I got through all of these topics, I put them onto these Trello cards. And I moved them around, and I used this Trello board to say, okay, here's the rough stuff. How do I move this around into a framework that's going to make sense for my book? And that's how I discovered the 4 cornerstones model that I use for elevating your personal platform. These platforms that go from the showroom to from the soapbox to the showroom to the stage to the stadium, they each rely on the same 4 cornerstones. There's what you say, what you sell, your strategy, and your systems. And those are the 4 sections of my book. Every platform needs all 4 of these cornerstones. And if one of them is weak and it's lower than the others, then your platform's always going to be leaning in that direction. That cornerstone's going to be dominating your attention. And what I found in my work with experts and entrepreneurs, Scott, is that they don't all need the same thing. They don't all need this same prescriptive process. They all have this one area of their business that's doing really well, and this one area that they need a lot of work for. And so I've developed a lot of resources and materials for individuals to say, this is where I need to focus. I'm short on my positioning cornerstone. I need branding. I need messaging, or my systems are broken. I need to figure out this journey from stranger to customer. And so I've made the book more like a choose your own adventure story, so that a reader can skim through the pieces where they're feeling strong and then really dive deep on the cornerstones where they know they need some work.
Very cool. Very cool. How long did it take you to write your big, long, bad first draft?
It took me a month, because I did it during National Novel Writing Month.
Fantastic. Good
if
for
you. If you don't know about National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo is the hashtag. During the month of November, fiction writers try and write a 50,000 word manuscript. And they share their word count on social media. And there's all sorts of clubs and organizations you can join. And I've done NaNoWriMo a number of times. I've never published a book from it, but I've written a bunch of manuscripts. And I decided to use it I think it was 2018. I decided to use that month to write my big bad first manuscript. And since the average novel is 50,000 words and the average nonfiction book is 30,000 words, that was my goal. I'm just going to write 30,000 words during the month of November. And that's what I did. And I ended up starting from scratch, and I didn't use any of that old manuscript. But that writing process of getting through that first manuscript was really essential to try and figure out what it was I wanted to say. I really like first drafts for that, because you can write a bunch of garbage, and that's fine, because it helps you get through the process of mining your own creativity to discover what you actually want to write about.
Very smart. Yeah, it's funny. I was recently reading Write a Must Read by A.J. Harper, and she talks about this notion of a healing draft, right? Because often you have people who are writing memoirs, for example, and there's a bunch of stuff that probably shouldn't make it into the final manuscript, but they almost need to write it just to get it off their chest and get it onto the paper so that it can, get massaged and cut and edited into something that does help the reader.
I love that concept of a healing draft. How great.
Yeah, it's very cool. I'm really happy that you mentioned NaNoWriMo as well, because I think a lot of people think of it as a even if they've heard about it before, they think of it as a fiction writer's event, so to speak. And I think it traditionally was, but the fact that you used that for your first draft of your nonfiction book, I recently heard that Pat Flynn did the same thing with his recent book. So that I think is a coming trend. So everybody listening, NaNoWriMo's coming up every November. November's coming up soon, so start thinking about it. And then in terms of publishing, I'd love to get your perspective on the publishing process. Obviously, the publishing, all of the elements that are required to get a book from manuscript to publication, that's very different from the short form content area that a lot of people are familiar with. What did you find was perhaps surprising or even frustrating and even exciting about that whole process?
Well, I was really excited about the design aspect, Scott, because I'm a designer and I can geek out about which platform to use for which program and doing the design of the illustrations, and I really had a hands-on design process by finding the designers that I wanted to work on it and going through the revision cycles, and so I really enjoyed that. And what I got out of that was a whole lot of social media content for the future. Like the illustrations that go in the book have become the framework for a lot of the promotional assets that I'm planning to use in the future. And I really liked the publishing process because I've helped many clients go through their book publishing process myself, because a lot of my clients, as I said, are authors and speakers and coaches who often produce these sorts of materials. And so I've been on the back end of a lot of book funnels, doing the landing pages and the outbound campaigns, but I've never actually gotten to do it myself. And so it felt like I had done all the rehearsals working on other people's performances for so long that this was my opportunity to really get on stage. Like I said, I think of things as an actor because that's where I apprenticed in my crafts early in my life. And so it was really great to be able to, step out on stage myself and make this happen.
Wonderful. Anything that you found frustrating?
I knew in advance that I was gonna have a bunch of revisions because I'm picky about things like design. And so I think I would have been a lot more frustrated if I had given myself a shorter timeline. But I've been working on this book for 5 years. And I thought like a couple years ago, I was nearly done and then I realized it just wasn't good enough. And I thought about 9 months ago, the manuscript was done. And then I realized it wasn't good enough. And I redesigned my book cover 3 times. And I had designed it the first time a year and a half ago and thought I was done. And this really frustrated me that my coach said to me, this book cover looks boring and corporate and you are not boring and corporate. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do a completely different book cover. And I decided to put myself on the cover for the second cover. And I have a lot of feelings about authors putting their face on the cover. A lot of times it looks like it's because the author thinks that they're more important than the reader. And so I've always wanted to, I've been kind of repelled by it. But after some advice from some other people, I had this great photo shoot and I had this dynamic photo of me in this, this acrobat pose. And the title above, Marketing Yourself. And I loved the cover. People who knew me loved the cover, but people who did not know me hated it. They were, and because, I look like this kind of spooky clown and people have a phobia of clowns. So I realized I have to go back and do this again. And that really frustrated me to go back for a third time to revise the cover. But I did, and the cover that I ended up with, I'm really happy with. So that was frustrating to go again and again in the cover design process. But a lot of times, Scott, when we go through that revision process and we do the hard work to do it again, even if we thought we were done, doing it again, often it makes it better. And that friction, it's like a whetstone, that's where sharpness comes from, is the friction of difficulty.
Absolutely, and the iteration, right? That's the magic of editing as well, right?
Yeah.
What you start with is maybe great or might be very good, but it's that iteration and getting. I love what you talked about that people that knew you loved it, but everybody else, people that didn't know you, hated it, and that's that process of getting reader feedback, right? Understanding who is your target reader and making sure that you're resonating with them. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that
What
reader
are your
feedback is so essential.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
Now, what are your goals for the book? So obviously you have goals for your reader, but personally and professionally, what are you hoping that your book is going to deliver for you as an expert and for your business?
The book for me is really a positioning piece. I've been on the back end of enough book launches to know that they're not big money makers. They're unless you have that runaway breakout hit, you're not going to count on the book as the mainstay of your revenue as a entrepreneur. But boy, does it bring a lot of work. Having a published book and being the authority on the topic because you wrote the book on it. I mean, now I can say I wrote the book on marketing yourself. And as a business coach, that gives me so much credibility that, what I'm really hoping this does for my business, Scott, is that it positions me so that I get more speaking gigs and more coaching clients without having to do so many outbound sales calls. Right now, because I've worked as a salesperson in a boiler room, making phone calls early in my career. So I know how to do that. I know the sweat and grunt work that it takes to do that. And I do it because I'm willing to, but I'd really like to start fielding inbound requests where people reach out to me and say, "Hey, we have this keynote presentation for this conference. We think you'd be perfect for it." Or somebody reaching out and saying, "I need to elevate my platform, and you're going to be the perfect guy to do it." Instead of me having to proactively reach out to people for those opportunities, I'm looking forward to getting more inbound requests.
Yeah, very well put. And I think what you'll find is even when you are making outbound requests, there's just far less friction when you're reaching out and you are that established expert. As evidenced by your book, sales close more quickly, opportunities where people might have previously just kind of shut the door and not interested in having the conversation, they just open up. So that's good for you. I'm really happy to hear that that's how you're thinking about it. For those in our audience, because I think there are two camps of listeners to the Entrepreneur to Author podcast. There are those who have already embarked on the journey and they're writing their book, or they're at some stage of that entrepreneur to author process. And then there's a large number of people who have considered writing a book, but for whatever reason they haven't taken that plunge. What advice would you give to that second group of people, the people that are perhaps sitting on the fence? They know that they should, but they haven't done it yet.
I'd say the best advice I could give, Scott, is to publish in public. When I published my chapters as newsletters, every newsletter was syndicated into a blog post on my blog. And the last line was, this is an excerpt from my upcoming book, Marketing Yourself. Subscribe here to get on the wait list. And so I built my list while I built the topic. And as I was doing that, everybody who was subscribing through that avenue, I knew they were interested in the topic. They didn't find me because of something else I was doing. The Marketing Yourself message was what they were interested in. And by publishing in public, you get this, you build anticipation with your audience. And it doesn't matter if your audience is 10 people or 10,000 people. Getting people involved in the process, it gets them excited so that every time that you produce another, or you give another announcement, "Hey, I'm doing this thing," people are going on that journey with you. So that when you finally come around and say, "Hey, I've hit this milestone. I've hit 30,000 words," or "I've got the new cover design," or "the book hits the stands on Monday." When people are taken on that journey with you just because you shared it, it could be as simple as taking a photo of your printed out manuscript that you're writing your notes on. Every little bit of content that you can create that involves people in the publication process, it means that by the time you're ready to start selling your book, people aren't surprised by it. They don't need to be educated about your book and who you are and what you're doing because they've been watching you do it for a year. So that's the best piece of advice I could give, Scott, is to share your journey.
Yeah, that's great advice. And another advantage of that is it keeps you accountable too, right? Once you've put that public commitment out there,
Yeah.
it helps push you along too. It gets your audience excited, like you've said, but it also gets you excited and puts that little bit of pressure that some of us need to actually get the book written. So that's wonderful. Kaylin, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your book and also about you and the services that you provide to entrepreneurs?
Well, the services that I provide are through my digital marketing agency, Stellar Platforms. And at stellarplatforms.com, I've got my portfolio and case studies about my digital marketing work. Most of my work is on my personal website on kaylinhuntress.com. I've been blogging there for years, documenting my adventures, living in Costa Rica, moving to New Zealand, which is where I live right now. But my name's hard to spell, and so I'd say the best place that your audience could find out more about me is at marketingyourselfbook.com. And that's where I've got all the information on the book. You can subscribe to my newsletter to get a free chapter of the book at marketingyourselfbook.com.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to put that in the show notes so that it's easy for people to access. Kaylin, this has been so great. I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your valuable experience, both as a marketer, but also as an entrepreneur turned author.
Thanks, Scott. It's been great talking with you.
As we wrap up this episode of Entrepreneur to Author, remember, now is the time. Time to write, time to publish, and time to grow. I'm Scott McMillan. Until next time.